Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is excuse. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear excuse used is to mean to try to lessen the blame in a situation or to try and defend or justify. So when we think of this verb, many times we're going to think of something unfavorable, maybe even something bad that has happened. And someone might be using their words to try and lessen or reduce the amount of blame they're receiving for that bad thing, or they might be defending why they acted in a particular way. A second way you hear the verb excused used is to mean to forgive someone for a fault or offense. So in this particular definition, right, you might hear somebody say, "I excuse you," right? And they might go on to explain what the fault or what the offense, the bad action that occurred. Right. And of course, your subject could be different there. It could be we if you're talking about a group of people. A third way you hear excuse used is to mean to release someone from a duty or a requirement. Now, when I read this definition, the first place my mind went was to jury duty. So, this is an expectation of people in the United States, adults, to serve on juries if they are able. Now, many people don't want to participate in this process. It could be taking time away from their work, from their family, from school, or other things. So, many times they're hoping the court will release them from that particular duty. A fourth way the verb excuse gets used is to mean to allow someone to leave a place or for someone to kind of announce in a very polite way that they are leaving a particular location or even sometimes an event. You should know that the verb excuse is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E and then add ing to form excusing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made just by adding the letter D since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, excuse, I'm really going to stress that. I hope you can hear. It's ending with a Z sound. Okay, that's going to be important for a couple of reasons. One we'll talk about a little later in this video, but right now, I hope you can hear that Z sound. That's a voice sound because that tells us we're going to make a D sound when we form the past tense or participle uh, of this verb. So it should sound like this: excused, excused. Hmm? Notice I'm not adding an extra syllable as I say it. So I'm just going straight from that z sound to a d sound. Okay? Now, let's take a look at some phrasal verbs with excuse. You are likely to hear excuse for, which means to forgive one for something, and generally it's something minor, not something serious, not something that was very harmful. An example of this might be, "Excuse me for being late." Right? So here, someone is asking to be forgiven, right? And maybe if they're just a couple minutes late, that's a small mistake, a minor mistake. Now, I want you to notice that this phrasal verb is generally we're going to separate. So you're going to find something between the verb and the particle for. Okay? The second phrasal verb you might encounter is excuse from. This is another one we're going to separate. And when we use this, we're talking about permitting or allowing someone to be absent from something or some event. An example of this might be, "Will you excuse me from class tomorrow?" This is a question I have heard many times from my students, right? So, will this sort of be an allowed absence? Can you permit me to miss class? That's what they're asking. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day excuse, and we're going to practice it in a couple different ways. The first way we'll practice today is with the imperative. You might know this as a command. So, in these sentences, we are telling someone either to do a particular action or not to do an action. The imperative is unique in English because there is no stated subject. The subject is implied. It's you singular or you plural, depending on how many people I'm talking to, right? Either one or two or more. Now, when I go to make an affirmative statement in the imperative, I can just start my sentence with the base verb. Now, I've had students tell me in the past, oh my goodness, Katie, that seems rude. I'm not comfortable doing that. That's okay. Another way you can kind of soften or make things more polite is by using the word please. You can put please at the beginning of a sentence or you can put it at the end, but you don't need it in both places. I've done that in my first example sentence here. It says, please excuse me, but I need to get to my next meeting. So someone might say this if they are exiting a conversation, maybe they're exiting a particular place and they're sort of explaining why they need to leave. And this could be a kind of tying back to that fourth definition where someone is announcing they need to leave. There might be also a little combination here of like forgiveness, right? Forgive me for leaving now, and kind of offering this justification why I'm doing it. Now, if I want to make a negative sentence in the imperative, so here I'm telling someone not to do a particular action, then I can begin with my sentence with do not and then the base verb. Or I can use the contraction don't and then the base verb. You can see that in my example. Don't excuse that behavior. Ooh, maybe we can imagine a situation where someone has done something that we find offensive. Someone has done something bad. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a coworker, and someone else is starting to explain why, justify why the person acted this way, right? We might be going, no, 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 wait, don't do that. Maybe this isn't something that's small. Maybe it feels like a bigger, more serious type of mistake. Now, let's talk about the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. And the thing about the simple present is that we need to pay attention to our subject. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, then I'm going to use the base verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to add an S to the end of this verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Many grandparents excuse their grandchildren's not so good behavior. So here might be kind of going like, oh, it's not serious, or oh, they're just playing, right? Instead of kind of making them take responsibility for doing something that's not quite right or correct or saying something unkind. So I know this has been a source of conflict for some families, right? As parents try and discipline their child and children, and the grandparents maybe rush in to go, oh no no no, it's okay. So notice here I've got grandparents plural, so that's why you don't see an S on the end of the verb. Now let's talk about making negative sentences in the simple present. To do this, I'm going to have my subject. And again, I'm paying attention to it because if my subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use do not and then the base verb. And if my subject is he, she, or it, then I'm going to use does not and then the base verb. So notice I'm not adding an S to the end of the verb here in the negative. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Having a bad day doesn't excuse you from treating others badly. So this, what we're saying really isn't a justification. This is not an acceptable reason why you might be acting in this particular way. So having a bad day, you might notice we've got a ger in there. That's like it. And that's why we're using does not and then the base verb. Now let's talk about making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, I start with do or does, whichever form matches our subject, and that subject comes next. Then you're going to see the base verb. So again, notice I'm not adding an S to the end of the verb here. Okay. Let's take a look at the example. Does my prior work excuse me from jury duty? That ties back to that earlier example I gave you here. So maybe someone has worked at the company that is being sued in this particular place. So that might be a reason why someone is not required to serve on a jury for in this particular matter. Now, let's spend a moment talking about some words that are related to our verb excuse. And the first word we're going to look at is going to look very familiar to you. It has the exact same spelling, but the pronunciation is different. So you might remember earlier in the video, I told you to pay attention as I'm saying this verb, excuse. I'm making a Z sound. But when I pronounce the word as a noun, I'm going to change the ending sound to an S sound. So it should sound like this: excuse, excuse. Okay. So the noun excuse can be used a couple different ways. One would be a reason or an explanation that one says, or maybe that one writes, one you text, in order to defend or justify something bad that has happened. An example of this might be, this student hasn't had a good excuse for missing so many classes. Right? So for many teachers, right, we understand that people get sick. I work with adult students, so I'm also very mindful that people's children get sick. That happens, right? That's a pretty good reason why someone might be unable to come, right? But just like, didn't feel like it. That might not feel like a good explanation to many instructors. A second way we use the noun excuse is to talk about a reason that isn't the real reason that someone acted in a particular way. So the first thing said is trying to hide or conceal the truth. An example of this might be, don't use the weather as an excuse to skip the party. Right? So here, this person maybe is suggesting that isn't really why you want to skip or not attend the party. There must be something else, and it might not be a reasonable explanation to use the weather. Now let's keep talking about some other related words. The next is the adjective excusable. You might notice that suffix, that able. In many of my classes, we talk about how that relates to able to be, and we can kind of look at that root word. So you've heard me say justify, kind of to help explain why a bad act has happened. We also talked about earlier that excuse is sometimes used to mean to forgive. So all of that ties back here into the definition of the adjective. So able to be justified or able to be forgiven. An example of this might be, don't worry about that. It's an excusable error, right? We can forgive that. Maybe I understand why you made that particular mistake. Let's look at one more related word today. It's the adjective inexcusable. So I've added the prefix in to my last word. And if I have any current students watching, again, we've talked about how that prefix frequently means not. So my last word here is not able to be justified or not able to be forgiven. An example of this might be, hate speech is inexcusable, right? So many people find this out after they share really horrible things online, whether it's in social media, and that gets shared. Um, really hateful, harmful words that target different groups. Um, and for many people, rightfully so, right? We just can't forgive that. We can't work with. We don't want to interact with people who behave in that way and who have such harmful, hateful feelings towards others. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.